what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Special Edition. I'll be shortly joined by Mitchell from Australia and Paul on the plane, who are planning to ask me a few questions about the interview with Fight the Flat Earth. So I'm going to hopefully get a call from them on Skype, and as soon as I do, I'll introduce you guys to the call, and hopefully it'll go well. I don't know exactly what they're going to be asking me about, but we'll find out shortly, so wish me luck.
Calling.
Hello!
Mr. Nathan Oakley, I presume.
Hello. How you doing, Paul?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Very well, very well.
Good. And we have Mitchell on the line as well.
Hey, Nathan. How are you, mate?
Oh, good. Good to hear from you, Mitchell.
Great. Well, thanks for spending a couple of minutes with us. We sincerely appreciate it. We are in the midst of recording our podcast. And to kind of set the context, I'm not recording yet, just wanted to do some introductions here. But Mitchell's been wanting to do a Begging the Question show, talk a little bit about that logical fallacy. And then he sends me the link yesterday and said, coincidentally, Nathan was just speaking about this. Talking about your exchange with Fight the Flat Earth, which was, and I got a chance to listen this morning, which was priceless. But we really wanted to have a chance to talk to you a little bit about it and kind of dive in deeper into logical fallacies and begging the question, all that. And we thought that you would be a good man to help us along the way here.
Sure.
Are you ready?
Wait.
All right. All right, here we go. I'm going to hit record here, and then we will proceed. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome back to Dome Life with Paul and Mitch, exposing the globe lie. And as promised, that's right, we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, creator of the Flat Earth debates. I'll have to talk how many shows you have so far. He is a professional globe destroyer. That's right. It's none other than Nathan Oakley. Sir, how are you?
Very well. Thank you for having me here, Paul and Mitchell.
Pleasure is all.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all ours, Nathan. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, as Mitch and I were talking before the break, we were talking a little about the logical fallacy begging the question, and that was, I think, really the highlight of a recent conversation you had with Craig over at Fight the Flat Earth. And I really wanted to start out. First of all, how many shows are you at now, sir, with your Flat Earth debates? Because it's astounding how long you've been doing this.
1,238.
That's all?
That's all.
That's all.
Not very many.
Well, first of all, congratulations on much success, and it's always a lot of fun to, I'm unable to time-wise listen to everything, but I get bits and pieces here and there, and it's just an astounding how much globe versus flat Earth conversation you and a lot of those people have had for so long, and frankly, I'm surprised when some globe defenders will be willing to go on the show and talk. And after hearing time and time again that what they need to be able to bring to the show to even garner your respect or even for you to listen to them, it has to be truly scientific. It has to have provenance, has to be evidence-based. And they continue to bring these logical fallacies. Are you surprised at all, Nathan, that they haven't come up with anything new after over 1,000 shows?
Not really. I mean, the begging the question aspect of it is the main heart of any claimed globe proof, and it was actually Validation Boy, probably back in 2014 or 2015, that was the first to highlight this, or bring it to my attention at the least, by publishing a video pointing it out. And he put it very simply. He said, every single claim to be globe proof ever presented, ever, will assume that the Earth is a globe. And when he said that, I was like, yeah, you're right. There isn't a single case that you'll find that somebody doesn't beg the question to try and prove something that simply isn't true. and that's that we're on a sphere. We're not. But the claim proofs of it will always start by assuming you're on a sphere. I'm sure we'll get into plenty of examples.
Yeah, absolutely. That's same thing. I never thought of that until you mentioned it. Until I heard that through the community and that sort of thing. So you're right. And it was highlighted, I think, especially well. And we're going to obviously put the link to this portion of the debate that we're talking about today. When Fight the Flat Earth came on your show. But I believe it was the second or third. You called it the housekeeping questions, which I love. Which is where you try and start with somebody. I think it was the second one when we talking about proof of Earth rotation. And Craig started every time. You asked him, I know 1,000 times. Okay, what is it? What is it? And he kept saying, if the Earth spins, and you had to stop him right there every single time. Can you explain why?
Because you assume that's the definition of a begging the question fallacy, to assume your outcome. So to lay down the actual thing you're trying to prove as a supposition in the first instance is a begging the question fallacy. So to assume your outcome, basically. So to assume that you're spinning by stating, if the Earth is spinning, is the very definition of begging the question. Because that's the thing you're trying to prove. So to assume it, I wasn't going to allow him because of he was quite an awkward guest in the respect that he's got his own audience listening, so he's got to be cognizant of the fact that they can hear some of the rebuttals coming through, and that can't stand. So he's got to sort of talk through as much as he possibly can of the rebuttals that he's receiving, because his audience doesn't have to be subject to them then. But by the same token, I'm trying to keep the interactions as swift as possible. In other words, cut his head off at the first opportunity, because letting him get into the logical fallacy that is an affirming the consequent formal logical fallacy, which we might or might not get into, was just going to be something that would require longer to pick apart. As soon as he's begged the question, you might as well just stop it there. But typically what they'll do, if they're allowed to, is then formulate the begging the question into a further fallacy to make it seem more legitimate, which is to beg the question and then give an example and then say the example proves you're begging the question fallacy, and that's an affirming the consequent.
And I think
consequence.
A lot of people, a lot of general population don't know they're doing it. We were talking about this before you came on, Nathan, that they're popular taglines. They're things that are comfortable, that people know, that people have been taught their whole lives. They don't know that they're begging the question in the first instance when they're making assertions about where they think they live. So that's why I thought it was very appropriate to do a show on begging the question. And then Craig must have read my mind, because he came on and he perfectly exemplified what it is to beg the question and how you do it as a globe believer. And for you to point that out, it just kind of solidifies to people who don't know that they're doing it into a position where they can no longer do it. Now, we were talking about why Craig was still pushing those begging the question assertions. And as you said, he talks to his audience. He has to keep saying the taglines. They're popular. They're comfortable with people. He can't let those globe proofs that he calls them be destroyed. Now, other begging the questions are something like seeing a ship going over the curve. Can you explain why that is begging the question?
Sure. Well, the bit that would be begging the question would be let's use one of Arwin's words, or words of Arwin, I should say, the physical assumption bias. So you're assuming that the boat is, number one, going over, and number two, that the horizon is a physical edge. So you've made a couple of assumptions in your statement. So if you were to challenge me based on that statement, I would automatically point out that you've begged a couple of questions in your statement. So what, we're assuming the horizon's a physical sphere edge now, are we?
Exactly. And that's where the black swan comes in, because ever since the start of this year, I've been using it. A lot of people have been using it. It needs to be used a lot more. It is the number one globe killer. It destroys their very premise of having a spherical edge, and having a spherical edge creates that globe. So to cut that off at the knees, to say that we see too far, they can no longer beg the question. You just put the image up, you explain it to them. But in explaining to them, it kind of seems like we are begging the question. I want you to explain how we are not begging the question by going through the modus tollens. When we are saying if the globe has a radius of 3959, is that statement there begging the question, or is that because it's part of a logical consistency that is not begging the question?
On its own, it's begging the question, but as part of the modus tollens argument, it's part of the logical consistency to debunk their begging the question assertion that Earth is a sphere with radius 3959. So to just state that Earth is a radius 3959 shaped sphere, then that's begging the question. But if you take that statement and then demonstrate through logical consistency why that is not the case, i.e. if you have every measurement being 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet, then when you make an observation from a foot above the ground, the geometric physical sphere edge must be no more than 1.2 miles away from the observer. So when you, as you put it, just put the black swan on and explain to people, you are going to be explaining how they will reify a physical sphere edge based on the geometry laid down in the P and Q statement. So the P statement is if Earth is a sphere with radius 3959, on its own a begging the question fallacy, when formulated into modus tollens with the geometry of every distance to horizon can be no more than 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. Those two statements together are the claim that Earth is a sphere and the geometry that backs their claim Earth's a sphere. Now, the following statement in modus tollens is to smash it into oblivion by demonstrating that they don't have a physical geometric sphere edge horizon as required by their model. So absolutely not. It's a logical consistency argument. So the full rendition of if the Earth is a sphere, radius 3959, then every distance to horizon can be no more than 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. Observer's height in feet 1 foot, distance to horizon can be no more than 1 mile or 1.2 miles, and the black swan shows it in excess of 10. Therefore, the Earth is not a sphere, is the actual modus tollens formulation. That's definitely not begging the question, definitely not a logical fallacy, it's a logical consistency.
Exactly, a logical consistency. And then they back it up with something that they call refraction, which a lot of people up until this point here, as we're going to explain, don't know that this claim here of refraction in that black swan image is also begging the question, because they beg the question that light is refracting around a globe still. They still believe that it could be a globe and it is light refracting around that globe. But there's also another part to the begging the question in this being the atmosphere. And a lot of people still, even on our side, still use the word atmosphere, which is begging the question that there is air in the shape of a sphere. Am I correct in asserting that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this whole string of fallacies that's attached to it. You're correct. And yeah, atmo, air, sphere, shape. Air has no shape. It takes the shape of its container, but to assume a solution to a problem that they're going to be presented with a different housekeeping question, which we're not talking about at the moment, which is how can you have gas pressure without the necessary antecedent of a container, then you need gas to be spherically held to Earth by a non-force force of gravity. Again, we'll maybe get into that later as well. But yeah, they've got to beg quite a few questions. You're absolutely right. But that isn't necessarily where that argument dies. So in the modus tollens, you are correct, by the way. You could certainly take both of those angles and demolish them with them. I'm not saying that's wrong. But in terms of how they're... I'll explain why the angle isn't necessarily the correct one. So when QE first presented this to me, I went and got a different image, a more recent BLMS B69 image of the Black Swan, without any benty cranes in it, without any refracted cranes. And I presented it to QE and I was like, just use this one, because then they won't come back with refraction. And his answer to me, I'll never forget, he's like, I want them to. I was like, you want them to? He said, yeah, I want them to. And then he basically laid it out for me. The P statement, Earth a sphere, 3959 radius, leads on to the geometry of said sphere. Now, geometry is just that. It's geometric. It's the mathematics of that physical sphere shape. And that's the limitations of its geometry. That's what's laid down in the modus tollens. Nothing to do with optical effects, and nothing to do with refraction, and everything to do with the mathematical geometry that is claimed to be Earth as a sphere. As soon as they come back with refraction, then they undo the necessity for a tangent line. So they require a tangent line. Now, we'll get on to what you first noted, which is that they're begging the question when they say refraction. But the tangent line that they require is straight. That's what a tangent is. and it's a straight line to intersect a curve. And their curve that they're intersecting is the begging the question sphere Earth with a curve. And the line that it's intersecting, the point that it's intersecting, is the horizon in their model, a physical sphere edge, which they think the horizon is. Now, at that point, when they say refraction, they cannot derive R. So Al-Biruni is said to have measured R by way of a tangent to the horizon, a straight line to that point to measure the drop. But they need a straight line to do that to acquire the R value in the first instance, to later apply it with this word refraction, because refraction in globe vernacular is actually 7/6 of the radius. That's terrestrial, otherwise known as standard refraction. Well, to use standard refraction, 7/6R, you're going to need R. And how do you get R? Well, you measure it with a tangent. It's geometry. So to say that the line to the horizon's bent, refracted, deviated from straight, means they haven't got a tangent. Bye-bye globe model.
Would that be circular reasoning? Very simply.
Boom, boom.
You know what I mean?
Oh, was that a pun? No, not a pun. A serious question. Fair enough. Circular reasoning is begging the question. That's what circular reasoning is.
Oh, okay. You could use that interchangeably, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, they are interchangeable. Circular reasoning is to assume the thing you're trying to prove. Start with the thing you're trying to prove. Circular reasoning, yeah, correct.
Okay. All right, very good. Boy, if you ever consider taking or teaching a class on logical fallacies, I would like to sign up for that, because I think it just breaks down at its most simplest form. You could pretty much take any sort of argument that you get, any what somebody would call evidence or proof. You could take it and you could break it down to its most simplest form and go through these logical fallacies and say, well, you can't even really bring that evidence in the front door here because you're starting with a premise that is fallacious. I mean, it really, to me, it seems that simple. But what am I missing?
Nothing. We're just in an arena where the claim that they're making has no actual proof of it. There's certainly no scientific evidence that we're on a sphere. So if you have no evidence, what are you going to do? You've got to come up with something that seems to the untrained ear like it's proving something. And that's exactly what they do. They have to employ logical fallacy. They have no choice. So while it might be, or it might seem reasonable to dog on Craig and go, look, he just begged the question. Well, he has no other option, to be perfectly ruthless.
Yeah, and that's kind of what Mitch and I were talking about earlier. Getting into trying to psychoanalyze some of these people, like Red's Rhetoric, like Fight the Flat Earth, like Mr. Sensible, some of these Simon Dan, some of these folks who have become, developed these followings because they are, I think, very good at speaking to the untrained ear, to use your words, which I agree with. Psychoanalyzing these folks, I'm always thinking and trying to figure out, do you think somebody like Craig do you think they truly believe what they say, what they think, or do you think that they are knowingly misleading their untrained ear followers?
Okay, it's a good question, but don't take offense to my answer. To divine one's thoughts is the acme of foolishness. I have no idea what his motivation is, and I don't have a crystal ball. All I can focus on is his arguments. That's all I can do.
Yeah, fair enough. I go back and forth. I just have trouble believing that somebody would knowingly mislead somebody, but at the same time, knowing how much they have invested, I think it's very difficult for them to even. I don't know if they even have the brain capacity to go past what their belief system is, and could possibly even be blocking them from even seeing their own fallacious arguments. But that's
you just hit the nail on the head.
Just speculation.
Oh no, you hit the nail right on the head. It's not necessarily that they're lying outwardly to others; they're actually lying and deceiving themselves. So this is pain relief. A few moments that they can actually believe their own nonsense.
It is, and that, like Mitchell, like you and I were just talking about, it's just, you go through your entire life believing one thing, and you begin to define your entire world and how you see the world and how you see yourself, how you relate to others, how you relate to nature is all based on this premise that the Earth is a sphere. And then this group of people show up and say, you're wrong, and you have no evidence. Well, you know what? Ego and a whole bunch of other things get in the way, and I'm going to show you. And like I think you have so eloquently demonstrated over 1,000 shows, Nathan, is just that's all they've got is these fallacious arguments to try and prove a point. And if you are able to see that logical fallacy that they're bringing to the table, that everything is built on, it kind of shuts things down very, very quickly. I'm surprised somebody like Craig is willing to come on the show and just take the verbal abuse, because frankly, I'm very intimidated by you, Nathan. I am so glad you're on our team, because that would be disastrous if you weren't.
It's easy to berate people when you've got the truth on your side, and that's the bottom line. No one's going to pick apart anything that we state on the show as being rooted in fallacy. And if anything was rooted in fallacy, it would be pointed out very swiftly with a huge dose of ridicule attached. And that's their main... There's two things here. And you're right, Mitchell, to focus on begging the question, because that is the root of it all. And the reason it's the root of it all is because it's the assumption that you're right anyway. So most people are under the misapprehension that they're just automatically on a sphere. So they've got the heart of a begging the question fallacy programmed into them from the get-go. So why does someone like Craig behave like that? Well, because he automatically knows it's a sphere. Well, that mentality is a mentality that's going to set you up to permanently beg the question and just have someone like me laughing at you for it. But that's how people are wired. And the other thing is that we're perpetuating this in ourselves. So there's a recent guy on the debate called Tommy who came on the show as a Globe defender, very, very vehement, very outspoken Globe defender, and has recently switched sides to Flat Earth. But the thing that got the most note out of me was that he recognised that it was him and his foolishness for not recognising the deception. Because if you look into it, these people, the priests of heliocentrism, lay it out in their scriptures, how it's not real, how it's a mathematical reification. So therefore we are only guilty of it ourselves. Once we come across the subject, your average normie doesn't know he's being brainwashed. But as soon as someone like Craig or any other anti-flat earth person comes to this arena and hears the arguments, they've then got to embark on a self-brainwashing path. And that's precisely what they do. And that leads to, depending on the level of intellectual honesty, the priesthood perpetuating out the get-outs and the logical fallacies for the people who can then perpetuate it to us. No, those are the people in the trenches, not normies. We call them fundamentalist religious globe zealots.
Yeah, very well said. That's the system. That's the system. That's the way it exists. So, when you are introduced to this conversation, this debate, if you aren't willing to even, first of all, admit that maybe I do need a brainwashing to look at this objectively, well, then they're probably going to lose just from the beginning. Because obviously all I can speak for is my experience. And when I first heard there was even a conversation about the shape of the world, I think that's the process I went through. I had to say, okay, well, maybe they're right. I'm talking about flat Earth, a flat Earth defender. Maybe they're right. But to look at this objectively, I've got to literally remove any chance of begging the question. I didn't think of that explicitly because I wasn't aware of logical fallacies really at that point, other than, when it came to the shape of the world. But I had to admit that maybe I was programmed, maybe I'd been lied to, and I needed to go through that self-brainwashing to be able to look at this objectively. And I think a majority of people, normies, I guess, I don't know if you want to call them that, they're not willing to go down that path.
Well, they may not be exposed to it.
Sorry.
Go on, Mitchell. Sorry.
Go on. I was going to say, I love that you call them the Globe proponents priests, the people that are outspoken, because they create the belief in these people, in the normies, in the 99% of the world, that there is a globe. They have to use their imagination. They've got an unfounded belief. And when my kids say to me, do I believe that the earth is flat? I say to them, I don't use belief, I use reality. And I don't have to use my imagination to know where I live. I can use my own two eyes. I can use my own demonstrations. That's what all my videos are trying to demonstrate, is what everyone can do for themselves at home without a belief system, without imagination, for reality. And once you use reality, once you use the things around us and take away that element of imagination and belief, you come to the conclusion, inevitably that the Earth is flat, stationary, and enclosed. And I want to touch on one of those elements, enclosed, because there's a lot of people, especially on our side, that have a bit of confusion about gas pressure without a container. It's quite obvious that there is no example of a gas pressure being maintained without a container, and even to the extent that you cannot have a vacuum without a container. But when we get into the second law of thermodynamics, it breaks down for people. People's eyes glaze over. They don't really know where to start, because you look it up on Google and all the Google searches apparently deal with heat transfer. But how does the second law of thermodynamics actually apply to things like air pressure and gas?
It's just describing change. So high pressure to low pressure. That's all it's describing. So entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, is violated by the assertion that we have an empty space for gas to fill. That would be the sky vacuum. And gas isn't filling it. That's not how gas behaves. It's just that simple. If the sky was a vacuum, the gas we breathe would fill the space. Simple. Therefore, space is fake.
It is. You can't let them beg the question of
Period.
Space.
Paragraph.
It's just as simple as that. But people go into, you don't understand the second law of thermodynamics. How would you describe something like entropy? Is there a description for entropy to make it easier for people to understand?
Yeah, change over time.
Yep, simple as that.
If you watch an empty...
I love it, simplicity.
If you paint a room perfectly and then just leave it, do nothing, it will decay over time, and it's proportional to time. So, in terms of the rate that it disperses into an availability of volume that it has to disperse into, that would be gas. Well, the rate that it disperses is irrelevant to the process. Over time, the gas will fill the space. Well, if you've got this exchange between an empty volume and a gas pressure that's trying to expand in all directions rapidly, and it's not occurring, then you've just got what is adequately described as a violation of natural law. And that's precisely what their assertion that we've got satellites, orbits, the Earth in a sky vacuum, basically the heart of the heliocentric argument. It's the number 2 on the list of top 3 globe killers. It's how can you have gas pressure without containment? You must have containment. Dome life, right?
That's right. You're right, Mitch. Here it comes. Here it comes. Go ahead, Nathan.
Are we?
You're on the top 3?
Begging the question in calling our show Dome Life, Nathan?
Right. But I mean, people try and hold me to account on this dome, and I don't claim a dome. I've got no issue with anybody who does, because it's akin to the point I make, which is we must have containment to have gas pressure. It's an antecedent-consequent relationship. Without the container, there can be no pressure. So you must have containment. Now, if you want to call it a dome, that's fine by me. In debate, I'd be held over a barrel for using that word. So I don't.
That's right.
And there's no need for me to point at the sky and say, I know what that is. It's a dome. I know we must have containment to have gas pressure. But like I say, that's number 2. It was number 1 on top 3 globe killers. You know, as soon as you debunk the medium, all of their best claims die. Anything that's claimed to have a picture from space, you know, shout out to Math Powerland, you've never been there. So what have you got to go on? Well, you got a picture. Well, where's the picture from? Well, it's from a natural law violation, sky vacuum. That's where. Automatically, therefore, fake. What's that? Travelling to the moon? Well, how did they get there? Through a sky vacuum, automatically fake. Anything that's claimed to be a picture from a satellite, the ISS, all travelled to planets, all fake, all taking place in a fake place called space, a violation of natural law. It all falls on its arse as soon as you point out that you can't have the gas pressure we're all breathing if it's not contained. And what's Earth in a sky vacuum? Well, it's an open system with gas not expanding into the sky vacuum. Total nonsense, complete violation of natural law, hence it's number 2 on the top 3 globe killers.
What is number 1 for
Black
you?
Swan.
Number one, the
Black Swan.
Okay. Yeah.
Number 3.
Yeah, that just.
Oh, go on.
Go ahead.
I was going
to ask you what number 3 was.
Well, number 3 is the Coriolis effect. So there's only really 3 aspects to heliocentrism. Earth as a sphere. That's debunked with the Black Swan. They haven't got an R value anymore to assert the Earth-based geometry with 3959 radius. That's dead. Black Swan killed it. Only rebuttal's refraction. That kills the geometry. It implodes upon rebuttal. So that's number 1. Number 2, gas pressure without a container. Number 3, Coriolis effect. So there is an assertion that we have a 15 degrees an hour deviation as the Earth rotates underneath an inertial reference frame. Therefore, as demonstrated or described by Neil deGrasse Tyson, you watch a football from the stand making a goal because Earth rotated underneath the football, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's called Coriolis effect, a 15 degrees an hour deviation, as it is claimed Earth rotates underneath things not attached, like footballs and bullets, and aeroplanes, and helicopters, and drones, and you, if you jump up and down. Anything that's not attached to a claimed Earth that's spinning will drift at 15 degrees an hour according to the claim that Earth spins. Now, if that was the case, you'd look up at a plane and go, oh, what do you know? That plane looks like it's taking a curved path. Only looks like it. It's just because I'm rotating underneath because I think Earth's spinning. That's why it seems to curve. Because Earth's rotating underneath that aeroplane. But if Earth was rotating underneath an aeroplane, then flights travelling west would be significantly reduced in flight time. For example, a flight from Charlotte, North Carolina to LA would take an hour and a half with the Earth turning underneath it, about 800 miles an hour, rather than the 4.5 hours it actually takes, because Earth isn't rotating underneath the aeroplane, causing you to see a not actual 15 degrees an hour deviation from the ground, which is what is claimed. When they say gyroscopes drift 15 degrees an hour, flat earther, well, they don't continue the statement. 15 degrees an hour as Earth is claimed to rotate underneath planes, drones, helicopters, hot air balloons. So you launch your drone and watch it drift away from you at 800 miles an hour if you're in Los Angeles. No, obviously that's not the case. We don't see any deviation. So the get out from the Globers, just so you can hear their rebuttal, is to start arguing about how things in the inertial reference frame, not attached to the spinning reference frame, actually travel with the spinning reference frame of an Earth. So they beg the question that Earth's spinning automatically in their rebuttal. Well, Earth's spinning and the plane's spinning with it. Well, that wouldn't give you a 15 degrees an hour deviation from the ground. I know Coriolis effect, but most people don't understand the Coriolis effect enough to appreciate when someone says Earth and atmosphere travel as one. Number one, it violates gas law. Gas is unbonded. It's not velcroed to the Earth travelling with it, as they beg the question of a spinning Earth. But also, you don't have any 15 degrees an hour deviation if they're travelling together, and that's supposed to be the thing they claim proves Earth spins. So just to summarise this particular globe debunking proof, number 3, Coriolis effect. Coriolis is an observation from a spinning reference frame of things seeming to drift. For example, you throw a ball from a roundabout, the ball travels straight, but because you spin underneath, it looks like it curves. Or to make the example even more simplistic, you're on a roundabout and looking at a lamppost that's concreted into the ground. It looks like it's coming towards you and then drifting away, and then coming towards you and drifting away as you spin underneath. But what the lamppost is doing is irrelevant for Coriolis effect. It's only what you observe. That's what Coriolis is. You observing not actual drift at 15 degrees an hour for the claim that Earth spins. But that's you on the rotating platform, claimed to be Earth spinning in this example, watching something seem to drift. So when they start detailing how, well, the plane's moving with this and moving with this, like, well, that's sod all to do with Coriolis effect. Only an observation of not actual drift. But we don't have it. Drones don't drift away from you. If Earth had a Coriolis effect, you could take off in a hot air balloon and just wait for the next country along to come to you, because Earth's turning underneath you. Obviously, that's not the case. And just in case you need a debunk for the claim that Earth is travelling with the atmosphere, which is, again, a violation of how gas behaves, we've got multiple directions of surface winds, automatically debunking that assertion that doesn't give them a Coriolis proof with 15 degrees an hour deviation. So there you go. There's number 3. Coriolis deviation. We don't have any. And when Brian Mullen pointed that out, he was attacked with the most vehement opposition you could imagine, because it's true. What he said was correct. We'd see shortened flight times if Earth was turning underneath to give us 15 degrees an hour of the Earth rotating underneath, which is what they claim we have.
That's right. Wow. Well, absolutely brilliant. Well said. Nathan, I would argue you probably have the firmest grasp on on these 3, and I have to agree. These are the best globe destroying concepts, and if somebody's willing to really study these and wrap their head around them, they are going to be very successful when they talk to family and friends and let them see that the premise that they're bringing to the conversation, that there is no scientific evidence for it. Nathan, I'm curious, when you began your journey to flat Earth, when you were first exposed to, I'm assuming you were like many of us, like everybody, that at one point in your life you believed that we were on a spinning globe. What was the straw that broke the camel's back for you?
It was Math Powerland. So to go back before the straw that broke the camel's back, I was a rep travelling internationally on planes all over the world. And as I did so, I would be that guy at the back of the plane, not strapped in, getting drunk and watching crap movies on the backs of headrests, watching the world go by through the back window because you had the biggest angle. And in my mind, as I did so, what went through my mind as a heliocentric believer was I wish I could go higher because I can't see any curve. And having a good grasp of heliocentrism, I knew why I couldn't see any curve. I wasn't supposed to see any curve from cruising altitude. So my desire was to go higher because I couldn't see Earth being a curved horizon physically reified with me being a globehead. Now, for whatever reason, on autoplay, I heard Math Powerland one evening very late at night, and I just heard him say the words flat Earth. It wasn't like I was intently listening to one of his videos. He just happened to be playing on autoplay. And when he said it in a tone that was unfamiliar, a tone that wasn't a tone of ridicule. And it was enough, just hearing him say it, to go, oh my God, the Earth is flat. And I literally, in that moment, all of my experiences as a child, swinging buckets around my head, thinking about how gravity made no sense, all of those trips on aeroplanes, all of that flashed before my eyes. And very, very early in the morning, I went into my wife, shook her and told her. I was like, Earth's flat.
Oh, no. I'm sure that went over well.
It didn't at all.
Wow. So it was really a culmination of many things. And it sounds like the globe crumbled very quickly in your mind. It was something about the tone. How would you describe the tone that you heard there? It was just because it wasn't delivered in a way that was ridicule or something like that. It was on all seriousness, and you took it as such.
Exactly. I heard what he was saying, and when he mentioned flat Earth in the way, I couldn't even tell you which video it was, but the way he said it was not in ridicule, as you precisely identified. Typically, if you hear those words, and you might hear them here and there throughout your existence, I know I'd recently watched a Vsauce video prior to that was ridiculing flat Earth. I didn't even recognise it as ridicule at the time. That's how globe orientated I was. But when I heard Math Powerland say it wasn't in ridicule, it was with a very different tone and timbre in terms of how he was describing flat Earth and saying flat Earth. So hearing those words not said in ridicule was enough to be the straw that broke the camel's back, enough to send me over the edge and think of all those times where I wasn't saying, isn't the globe beautiful? I was, in a weird way, saying, I can see this is flat. That's what I was saying to myself. But because I was brainwashed heliocentric, I'm saying I wish I could go higher to see it curve, which you could paraphrase as, this looks very flat. You know what I mean? Yeah, for sure. That's a great story. It's a great story. How long until your wife joined the fun, shall we say? Well, she's a normie, so she knows the arguments, she gets to hear the arguments, and often she'll parrot off some of the arguments back to me, or laugh at some of my opponents. So, although she's not ever in the room while I'm doing this, she's not in the room now, obviously she's monitoring the kids, but I know she can hear, because she'll often say, oh, what about this guy? I don't know, I'm pretty confident that having heard the arguments, I doubt she's a heliocentrist, but for the ease of general life, she wouldn't openly declare herself a flat earther. But based on what she said to me in general conversation and living with her, I'm pretty sure she's not a heliocentrist of any sort of stout faith, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I would be very surprised at anybody that would hear as much as they have heard from your show and your conversations to really be able to bring anything substantial to the argument. Go ahead, Mitch. I cut you off.
I was going to say, you are a family man, Nathan. I have young children. Paul has young children. Do you have much confidence by the time they are kind of grown up, 30, 40, 50, that things are going to change? The paradigm will shift, that flat Earth will become even more prevalent than it is now. Are we making an impact, do you think?
Oh, that's a really, really awkward question for me. I don't really care, if I'm honest. That's just going to sound terrible. Oh, God, let's try and rephrase this. There's certain people who come on the show like Spurs, who I describe as a flat Earth evangelist. Now, I've got nothing against people who want to go and spread the good word about the deception that people have put themselves through in the case of heliocentrism. Good for them. But for me, that's not necessarily the case. So, do I care if my kids grow up in a world that is heliocentric by nature? I don't really care. They don't watch TV. The YouTube that they do watch is monitored by me and my wife. There's certain things that they still watch that I don't necessarily agree with, and I kind of roll my eyes and go, there you go, there's your heliocentric programming. But that's the world that they'll grow up in. But I'm not on a mission to convert the people who come to my show. Far from it, in fact. Once they leave, I don't care. So I've now recognised in myself that to increase that by a margin or widen that net means that I generally don't care if people come to the show and are not converted to flat Earth. My objective isn't necessarily to convert you. It is, however, my objective to point out where, if you are, as a guest on the show's debating with us, says, this is how I understand the Earth to be a sphere, I want them to understand how that's wrong, and why it's wrong. But whether or not they go away and say, well, I therefore appreciate that the Earth is obviously and observably flat, I don't care either way. Everyone's entitled to their own beliefs, and it's. I don't see it as my place to change that.
Yeah, very good.
That's a great answer.
It's a good perspective. In fact, I would venture to say that there's many people in the flat Earth community that you have had a positive impact on. Just in whether they've been able to speak with you directly or not, but just listening to the show, listening to you and, some of your colleagues, Sleeping Warrior and Ranty and, a couple other folks that I've been able to meet that, are in that community, and just hearing how you guys are able to break down these arguments, able to break down, the fallacious arguments that are brought to the table that you would think that anybody would bring, and that's very logical why they would bring these globe defending or try to defend the globe the way that they do, because like you said, they don't have any other way. But I think you've had obviously a great impact, and whether it's intentional or not, it's been a big impact on the community. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to say that you were a big part of them coming to the realization that the globe doesn't hold water, scientifically speaking, and to try and argue for the globe, all you're going to start with is begging the question, and that's really where it's going to begin, I think.
And people definitely need to know where they can join your show, listen to your show. Give yourself a shameless plug, Nathan.
Oh, I'm good at that. So be here or be sphere for Flat Earth Debate and Flat Earth Debate Uncut and After Show. So it goes out UK time, 2 p.m. Do you know what time that is, Australian?
I think it's 11 p.m. Eastern, and Western maybe 2 hours behind that, maybe 9 p.m.
So 9 p.m. Western, and it's also 8 a.m. New York time. It gets earlier, so it's a pretty early show for the Americans. But there we go. It's also repeated about 6 or 7 hours later on my second channel. So it's Nathan Oakley 1980 for the live show that goes out at 2 p.m. daily, and it's 9 p.m. UK time on Nathan Oakley channel. So those are my two channels. Nathan, I've got several, but those are the two main ones. So Nathan Oakley 1980 and Nathan Oakley. I've also got a forum, which is on nathanoakley.com. So be here or be sphere for Flat Earth Debate Forum to keep up to date with the community debate. And that's about it.
That's great. That is great. And as I mentioned, we'll include a link to those channels and the specific conversation that you had with Fight the Flat Earth. I call him Fallacy for Flat Earth, or no, Fallacy for Globe Earth. I think that's what I've renamed him. That's what the first F stands for now, at least in my mind. But we'll include those links in the show notes, so please check it out. I'd be surprised if you have not heard any of the Flat Earth Debate Show, but just in case you haven't, won't you please go over there, subscribe, and definitely check it out, because you're going to learn a lot just by being a fly on the wall. Nathan, thank you so much for staying up late. We sincerely appreciate it, and it's always great to hear from you. And keep up the great work. And here's to another 1,000 shows or so. Appreciate you spending some time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Mitchell, as well.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Are we going to try and get Nathan to answer some speak pipes with us? Have you got a bit more time, Nathan?
Yeah.
Oh, Nathan, did we lose you?
No, I'm here.
Oh, cool.
Are you able to stick around for a couple more minutes? We've got some calls that come in that we listen to and respond to, and would you like to hang around for those? You're more than welcome.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, don't go anywhere, folks. We will be right back with Speak Pipes. It's time to hear from you, our listeners. You're listening to Dome Life with Paul and Mitch. All right, I'm going to stop recording for that segment. And
the speak pipes are probably going to come through a bit muffled on our end, Nathan. Like you play them through your speakers, don't you, Paul?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. So I will, hopefully you'll be able to hear it. So it's going to be routed through a different, so in the post-production, they'll obviously be a lot clearer, but I'll make sure to keep the volume up as much as I can so you can hear them. But these are messages that people leave. And the question was, well, you'll hear it when I introduce it, but appreciate you chiming in on any of these that you would like to. All right?
No worries.
Here we go. All right, welcome back to Dome Life, exposing the globe lie, and it's time to hear from you, our listeners. Congratulations to Patrick and Austin, who were our double winners from our last episode of free Dome Life podcast, Not Real We Check t-shirts. For this show, the question that Mitchell posed was simply, what is the thing that we in the flat earth community should be addressing when it comes to debunking the globe? What is this, I guess, what was the strongest argument for the globe, I guess, or the one globe proof that was the hardest or still the hardest to overcome? I think that's kind of where we left it, Mitchell. Does that sound right? Something of that nature.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
It was a very long-worded question, but trying to kind of flesh that out, whatever maybe something that people are struggling with, that maybe their buddy keeps bringing up and they're just not sure how to overcome it. They probably learned a lot already by listening to this show, but let's just see what folks have for us. All right, let's see who's going to win a t-shirt this week. Punch it, Mitch.
I'm going to let Nathan punch the button. Nathan, could you just press that button over there, mate?
Doing.
No, don't hang up. Don't hang up. All right. We've got 8 messages to hear this week, so let's get going. The first one is from Austin. Here we go.
My morning, boys. I know it's probably a bit cheeky to try and leave two speak pipes, but something about your last episode really spoke to me. It was a great episode. And something one of our other listeners, I think it was Bernard said that he wanted Dome Life podcast to be just about flat earth stuff. Well, I would argue that speaking about the coronavirus and speaking about global financial issues and things is Dome Life related, because I can guarantee you that the people that are lying to you about the shape of the earth are the exact same ones that are lying about this pandemic and about any other number of things that you care to think of. So anyway, keep it up. Paul, Mitch, rock on.
All right. Thanks, Austin. Mitch, obviously you agree. We say anything that happens within this gas pressure enclosed system. I notice I didn't say Dome Life, but he knows I just admitted the We can't have gas pressure without a container. Within our enclosed system of existence, you're right. Anything is game. So appreciate that, Austin. All right, let's just keep moving right along here. Up next is Jewel.
Many flat earthers kind of get hung up on the question, why do they lie about the shape of the earth? And I think we kind of get hung up the same way when we try to understand why serial killers do what they do. The average person can explain it from their frame of reference because they're not psychopaths. But to convict a killer, all we need is the evidence. So why is flat earth important? A thinking person can figure out that it was not planes that brought down the two towers, it was controlled demolition. Our Constitution was built on the two towers of God's law. Love your neighbor as yourself and love your creator. Building 7 came down as well. The 7th letter of the alphabet being G for God. It seems to me this was a message. Bring down the two towers with controlled demolition and God will just disappear. We are now witnessing the attempt at controlled demolition of our Constitution and our belief in God. This is a lie I believe they could not have gotten away with if the people had first been awakened to the lie of the round earth.
Wow, thanks, Joel. Nathan, what do you think? Your thoughts on that?
Closer to the mark than he might realise. So the world is run by psychopaths. There is no doubt about that. And psychopathy is one of those subjects that had I have not heard Math Powerland that day, I'd have probably been covering psychopathy right now rather than flat Earth. But there we go. That was just one of those subjects that I did a lot of research into. And he's not wrong. Yeah, the world's run by psychopaths. And some of the things that we have to endure are laughable. If you can detach yourself from the lie, if you call it that, if you phrase it a lie, some of the things that you look at in the heliocentric world are a joke. And this is because of an aspect of psychopathy called duper's delight. And a lot of the time they are just laughing at us. A lot of the stuff on the ISS is a good example of that, which you cover, I know, Paul. But he's not wrong. You know, the world is run by psychopaths. I don't know if I necessarily agree with some of the stuff he said about controlled demolition, but there we go. That's a different subject. And it's not something I want to cover on my show. Whether or not you cover that is entirely up to you.
Yeah, we cover everything, don't we, Paul? We cover vaccines, other conspiracies, other truths. Is there anything else other than flat Earth that you kind of research, Nathan? Do you go into other truths or conspiracies?
Oh, absolutely, all day long. But I see it as a folly. So the reason I see it as a folly isn't because it's not important. Because to some people, it is important. Some of the hoaxes in the media, for me, I see them as magic tricks. And number one rule on YouTube is don't mess with the current magic trick. So if you mess with the current magic trick, Corona's not a magic trick that's current anymore. As much as most people probably don't realise that. It'll take them another year to realise that magic trick was cast back in January. You know, when all the laws changed, that's when the magic trick was being cast. No one was looking. Now, you can talk about it all you like. No one cares. The magic trick's successful. It's done. We've got the new normal. So if you hadn't realised it yet, the new normal's here. Should be used to it by now. Me, I crapped my pants when I saw them change the laws and moaned about it publicly. So yeah, I will cover these things, just not on flat Earth debate. I see the flat Earth and the globe lie as the biggest deception in mankind's history. So in that respect, yeah, the guy's right in that respect. If you can recognise that you've been duped into the entirety of the nature of reality, then you'll recognise that there's much, much smaller lies that were really easy to get past you. So yeah, I totally agree with him in 90% of what he said.
Yeah, I mean I think that's a very, very worthwhile perspective to take. If you at one point believed that the entire nature of your reality, that you lived on a spinning ball flying through space, you'll probably, at that point in your life, you probably believed anything, because that's the big one. So I agree with you 100% there, Nathan. All right, we're going to move on to Daniel.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Mitch. Daniel here. Just heard the podcast. Loved it. Mitch's explanation on the atmosphere deviation thing, that kind of went over my head. I think it's going to go over a lot of people's heads. Maybe I should do a whole episode on that sometime because your entire argument rests upon what Neil deGrasse Tyson said. And, you know, he could be full of it, you know, but what's my best flat Earth argument? Eric Dubé's 200 Proofs the Earth is Not a Spinning Ball, or Eric Dubé's A History of the Flat Earth. just that video as a whole is only 2 hours. If you can sit down with somebody and watch those videos and pause it and have a conversation with people, I think you can win them over. Because the main arguments for flat Earth, we see too far, stuff like that, the ocean isn't curved, the moon's too bright, this type of stuff. I think I can defeat that with reason. You know, maybe a light bends gravity, or maybe gravity bends light. Maybe the inverse square law of light doesn't apply to light traveling through a vacuum. The ocean isn't flat because it's constantly rocking back and forth. Tides every 3 hours. Those three things I can kind of give an answer to, but 200 proofs as a whole, why does the moon light up only individual clouds of the sky? Why don't battleships have to lead their targets hundreds of miles away? These things can't be explained on a ball. Why isn't the ocean churning? That type of stuff. So maybe something like that. I don't know. I got to wrap it up, though. Keep up the...
All right. Thanks, Daniel. I think, Nathan, you probably would have fun talking about some of those begging the question arguments that he would have against, or excuse me, for the globe. But I guess your reaction to some of his thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, you already identified that he's begging the question with some of the examples he's giving for globe proof, i.e. assuming the outcome of gravity, but also special pleading fallacy. So, well, maybe gravity does this. Well, number one, what's gravity? It's not a force. That's Einsteinian new hotness, as described by Chocolate on the Flat Earth debate, Chocolate saying. So their claim that gravity is a force to force things to do anything is 105 years out of date. The current rhetoric of gravity is Einsteinian pseudo-Ramonian bending of conceptual mediums known as space-time, and the mathematical description thereof isn't going to force anything to do anything. So no, your special pleading isn't going to go over, but you've got to understand some of the arguments in depth to be able to rattle that off in a general conversation with your average normie. And most normies won't they'll glaze over when you start detailing pseudo-Ramonian force space and bending conceptual mediums, explaining that you can't bend the concept of time, and that's what mathematics of Einsteinian gravity do, and 105-year out-of-date ideas of it being a mass-attracting mass force is also completely wrong. It's been superseded. Like I say, most people will just glaze over when you try and explain that to them. So while he's saying watch 2 hours of Eric Debay, I wouldn't necessarily advise that. I'd take the same tact I take when I'm talking to normies, if I ever do engage with normies about this subject. So I'm very careful not to drag them into go and watch 2 hours of Eric Debay or watch 2 hours of my debate show even. I would stick with actually number 2 on the list, i.e. the top 3 is really applicable in the trenches of debate, whereas in general society I would stick with number 2. Just look up at the sky with a very casual grin and say to them, so you reckon that's a vacuum? And leave it at that. It doesn't need a great deal to debunk heliocentrism, because most normies have got the idea that there's pictures from space. So if you debunk space, and you can do that literally, just tilt your head to the sky and say, so that's a vacuum. And when they think about it for a few seconds and say, yeah, that's right, space, a vacuum, yeah. So why isn't the gas filling it? That's what happens, right? Gas pressure fills the vacuum. Open a valve on a vacuum, the gas will rush in. Well, if the sky's a vacuum, we'd all be dead. Space is fake, mate. Yeah. That would be what I'd lead off with, rather than suggesting someone watches 2 hours of debate. Definitely watch 2 hours of Dome Life, though. I would definitely recommend that to all normies.
You brought up another logical fallacy, and if you could just elaborate that on that specifically. You said it was bleeding something. Can you? And that was saying, well, I think you were responding
special
to
pleading.
Somebody saying, special pleading, like, oh, maybe gravity works this way in this medium, or maybe light works this way in space. Is that special pleading?
Yeah. So if I'm trying to prove the premise of unicorns by assuming that unicorns are real for the sake of argument, and the argument is about the the magical unicorn farts that they produce, and I say, well, yeah, but if in Narnia the time dilation would be such that you couldn't detect the smell. And then I'm just making up this whole nonsense scenario.
Well, just making it up as you go.
Yeah, just appealing to nonsense, basically. Special pleading.
Special bleeding. Make it up as you go. All right, I can remember that. All right, thanks for that, Nathan. That was awesome. Kevin is up next.
Hey, Paul and Mitch, I wanted to answer your question on what is the best globe argument. And one of the best arguments that I've come across is, how do you explain a sunset? The sun doesn't just go under the flat Earth. How does it do that? They can't understand that. So basically, they'd have to understand the vanishing point. If you don't understand the vanishing point, it's basically, the foundation of the sunset. The sun never sets; it just goes, into the vanishing point and around. Now, to expand on that sunset or that idea, right? Wolfie has a contest, the Equinox Challenge. On the equator at equinox, the sun rises at 0 degrees altitude, 90 degrees east, then 90 0 and 0 90 west. And the reason you can explain all this is from the path of the sun. It's basically like the Coriolis effect. So it's a +1, -1 until you get to 90 and 0. They're like boundaries, just going by math, right? So it's 0, 90, 90, 0, 0, 90, -90, and then you have 0 as well. So with that, that is the best argument that they have. And I proved it, and Wolfie gave me a $100 gift card to Amazon. Thank you.
Sorry, Kevin, you lost me there. I don't know. Either of you gentlemen follow what he was speaking about?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to break down what he's done a very convoluted job of what he's claiming, but I can paraphrase into what they claim as globe proof. If that was a scenario on the debate, what I would do with that chap is get him to define precisely what he's trying to prove and how he proves it. So this is what I claim proves the globe, and it is exampled by this. So you get them to actually formulate it into what they obviously at this stage see as a logical consistency. However, it won't be. What he's doing is affirming the consequent. So what he's saying is, if the Earth is a sphere, we will observe this particular movement of the sun during the equinox. We do observe this particular movement of the sun during the equinox, therefore the Earth is a sphere. That's an affirming the consequent formal logical fallacy. So we didn't cover this when you were interviewing me, but might as well cover it now. So the way the formal logical fallacy is laid out is as follows. If P, that would be the begging the question fallacy that the Earth is a sphere, then Q being we will observe whatever, don't get lost in the weeds of what they claim. In this case, it's something to do with the sun on the equinox. It doesn't really matter. Then they affirm the consequent, which is to say Q, what the sun does. Don't get lost in the weeds of what they waffle on about. It'll be endless. But in this case, sun doing whatever at the equinox. Therefore, my begging the question fallacy, P. So if P, then Q, therefore P. That's an affirming the consequent formal logical fallacy. So that's what they try and do. It's just a elaborate begging the question fallacy to make it seem like you've demonstrated. The way to spot what they're doing is recognizing when they impose the assertion with a begging the question fallacy. So when he said the equator, the implication of the word equator is to suggest that we've got north and south hemisphere when they're a globe head. Now, they might not necessarily express that explicitly, but you just have to recognise what they're implying. And what they're implying is, I automatically assume that when I'm in the north, or what we call the north, I'm on the top of a sphere when looked at, how it's presented as a globe. And then if I'm in the south, the other side of the equator, then I'm antipodal to where I began. I'm on the other side of a sphere if you're looking at it as presented in a picture of the globe, on the bottom of it. Well, that's an assumption that you're on a sphere and you can travel antipodal when making these observations. And the equator itself is an arbitrary location that's been derived from sun movement. So to derive a location from sun movement and then use that arbitrary position that's not real, it's a midpoint between the seasons, and say this point, based on what I now observe of the sun, which I've got this arbitrary location from, proves a sphere when I assume that going that way's up on the sphere and going that way's down on the sphere. It's just begging the question that you're on a sphere. And they'll all do that. Most of the complicated arguments for a sphere will take that format, that logical fallacy format. It's a formal logical fallacy. In other words, it has form. If P, then Q, Q, therefore P, as opposed to just, I assume Earth's a sphere, therefore my argument is that Earth's a sphere. That's basic begging the question, circular reasoning. But the affirming the consequent just makes it that little bit more complicated, and that's all he's doing. He's saying this equinox observation proves a sphere, and here we go, here's the observation, therefore sphere.
Oh, got it. Brilliant. No, thanks for breaking that down. It makes sense. It's a more complex way of begging the question. And by being complex, I think a lot of normies will just assume it's correct because it's something they can't understand, or at least with at first blush. And that's part of the deception right there, right? I'm smarter than you, so I'm right. All right. Let's see. Thank you for that, Nathan. Chris is up next.
G'day, Paul and Mitch. Chris here from Queensland in Australia. Just ringing up to say g'day and chime in on this week's question. Come on, lads. We know the globe has got no good ones. We know there's no good ones, right? That's my answer. Actually, I'm really chiming in about last week's question, why flat Earth matters, because that's one of my favourite ones. And it's, I just wondered, did anyone else have that barrier coming into flat Earth? Like, is it something that really got you stuck up? It's like, I can see all the things debunking it, but I just can't see why it matters. I mean, for me, that didn't even enter my mind at all. It's obvious why it matters. Let's put hiding the creator aside for a second, and just the simple fact that they've set up these indoctrination camps called schools and taught us a bunch of lies on purpose. How do people not think that is important, or how can they see that does not matter? I just don't get it. I just cannot see it. Anyway, I just wondered, did you guys have this barrier, or is it maybe it's just a thing, like people who see it straight away don't even have that question because it's obvious. I don't know, but love to hear your thoughts. Is it true, Paul, that Paul Jr. caught all the fish on the camping trip, or were you carrying him as well? Anyway, love you. Peace. Bye.
Mitch, were you telling lies about me again to Chris? Your fellow,
that wasn't me. That was all Chris.
That was all Chris. All right. Well, Chris, just to respond to that real quickly, yes, he did a lot better than I on the fishing trip. So thank you for that. But getting back to what you were saying, and Mitch, I'm going to kick it over to you. I'd like to hear from you first, if you don't mind. In kind of a response to what Chris was saying. And I've been saying this all along, and I tout it because it just makes sense to me. And that is, you get all this evidence that the globe is a lie, that, the earth is, presents itself observably flat and motionless, so to speak. People just discard all of that because they don't know the why. And that would be like a detective, a murder detective stepping over a body and not even looking at all the evidence because he doesn't have a motive. And again, I agree with you, Chris. That doesn't make any sense. Mitch, what do you think?
Yeah, I've said it a few times that before Flat Earth, I was never really religious. I was never really contemplated a creator. But since coming to the realization that we are on a flat, stationary, enclosed reality, it does bring up the question of, do we have a creator? Nathan, do you have any thoughts on the creator? Does it cross your mind at all?
Well, again, the caller's got it right. I don't know if he realises why he's got it right, but are you aware of the ontological primitives?
The way you phrase it, I don't think so. Okay. But please explain.
The root of the deception in terms of heliocentrism lies with the origin story. And the origin story is to answer one of these questions in terms of where we came from. What is the beginning? You only have two options. Either the existence we exist in was born out of nature, or it was created. Those are the only two options in terms of how we came to be. So the origin story for heliocentrism is the Big Bang, a relatively recent story, I might add, within the last 100 years. Nevertheless, that story is the root of all existence. And in terms of maths, it's dividing by zero and coming up with everything. Mathematical nonsense. Nevertheless, that's what the story of the Big Bang gives you. Nature creating everything from nothing. Now, the alternative is a creator. Yep, that's the only two choices you have. Those are the ontological primitives. Now, how do you come to a decision about which one of those is true, given that the current rhetoric is literally heliocentric, Big Bang, everything out of nothing, Earth in a vacuum, swirling around an empty void of nothingness? Well, that is the answer to one of those questions, but it isn't the answer to that question. because that answer violates a natural law. So the first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. Well, if it cannot be created, how can nature create it? It violates one of the rules imposed in this existence that we take part in. Now, the only way around that is to have something that's external to that system to create it. And if that's your only existing option beyond a violation of the first law of thermodynamics, and we are governed by natural law, these are the laws that our existence take place in, therefore nature cannot violate that law. So you can't have nature creating itself. What are you left with? Well, we're left with a creator. So in terms of the why, well, you've only got one other answer when you get down to the brass tacks of what is the start of this particular deception. Well, the origin story starts with nature creating everything in violation of natural law, the alternative being God. That's it.
That's it. Well said. That was awesome. I'm going to have to use that soundbite from that. That was good stuff. All right. Moving along. We still got two more, so let's get those in and we'll wrap up. Scott is up next.
Well, it's Scott. I am a new flat earther, and I just have a question for the podcast. If you could address it. I'm an amateur radio operator, and I was wondering if you knew how or where to get information about potentially how radio communication would work. Long distance high frequency radio communication would work on a flat Earth model. I know how it works on a globe Earth model. They drill that into us with the ionosphere and the sunspot cycle. If you know anything about that, I'd appreciate it if you could address it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Welcome to the club. I'm glad you realize the globe is a lie, and that's great to hear. For your specific question, I'm definitely not the radio expert. I don't know. Either of you gentlemen know where we could point Scott when it comes to investigating, further. He obviously knows what's been drilled into his head, but as it relates to an alternative view about our nature of existence, where would you point him?
Mitchell. I can plug one of my shows where I interviewed a ex-radio engineer. Other than that, Mitch, anything?
Actually, Bob Nodell might I think he did some radio work. I guess point him there. Mitchell, do you have any other ideas?
And FE Core were attempting to do one of the longest radio transmissions or data transmissions, weren't they? I think look into FE Core whether or not they succeeded, but they were definitely trying. I think they had a fair bit of information on the world record as it currently stood previously, and it is a lot more than what the globe would say is possible over a curve. The only suggestion was it Scott, Paul?
Scott, correct.
Yes, Scott. The only suggestion to Scott is being a new flat earther, you have to kind of take yourself out of the model situation. Going from a globe model, you can't immediately go into, well, maybe it's a flat earth model, because that is another fallacy in itself, a false dichotomy, where you hold two things up and you compare them, and you kind of say, well, this can't happen on this model, so the other model, the alternative, must be true, right, Nathan?
Well, yeah, models are pseudoscience at the end of the day. We don't live on a model. So that seems like a cop-out there, because his question is to ask how radio communications work, and every time I've looked into it, it's just always point-to-point communications. They're just on a flat plane, and these two things can connect with each other. There's very little explanation needed. And when you go into the globe explanation, I can't remember the exact rate, 4/3R or something like that for radio communications. They just do the same as they do with terrestrial refraction, and just assume Earth is a sphere, and that the transmissions are going through a spherical shape. It doesn't matter if it's the ionosphere or whatever else. This oxymoron of gas having a shape and then presupposing that whatever transmission's bending at the same rate or a derivative rate of that R value that we've debunked with the black swan. So my advice to him would be, look into, again, how they claim these transmissions work on a sphere, and you'll quickly find that there's a lot of presupposition about Earth being a sphere and the transmissions bending at the rate of the sphere and things of that nature. So as much as I'm not a radio communications expert, and the only information I've ever come across always seems to describe that we've just got a flat plane with things collecting point to point. It's not that complicated.
Yeah, no, that's well said, Nathan, and and I agree. You got to start with the absolute simplest explanation, and that is, I mean, obviously, if you have to have a point that's sending and a point that's receiving, and depending on the strength of the signal, how far it's going to be able to go, and start there and kind of see where you get. But go ahead, Nathan. Which show? I don't know if you could bring it up. If there was a specific show where this was kind of hashed out with somebody that was a radio expert or had some experience, what show was that? Is that
sure? I mean, it was an interview I did. Flat Earth UK was the show, and I think it's number 6 or maybe even number 5. I forget. It was with Robin Poe, and she explained. I'll give you a broad strokes of her story. Basically, as an engineer in the army, she was told how to link up these relays to do communication at coincidentally a rough rate that wouldn't have any spherical obstruction. And when she was out in Ferrari, a part of Italy, she was trying to connect to a relay, but there was too much foliage or whatever in the way. So instead of trying to connect to the relay, she just pointed back to the original source, which was about 115 miles away, and got a perfect signal because there was nothing in the way. Now, she didn't give it any attention. She just radioed back and said, I've got a connection. Explained how she'd got a connection, and suddenly there's really big wigs coming down to tell her they don't like it. And she's got to take it down and get it working with the relay like the book says. Now, her experience was to say that my point-to-point communication at 115 miles would suggest there was nothing in the way. There should have been an Earth curve obstruction of a physical geometric horizon between me and it. And while she might have observed the physical obstruction, claimed to be a physical geometric spheroid horizon, that was just a perspective aspect of her vision, as opposed to something actually getting in the way. So other than that, I can't point him into any specific direction to research his own communication. But my advice would be, now that you recognise, what was this guy's name again? I've forgotten already.
It was Scott.
Scott. This recognition that you've been deceived in terms of the nature of your reality, for me, is a wonderful thing because it's very exciting. What is the way this communication works? Now, for you, that's your, wow, how does it actually work then? Well, isn't that a wondrous thing? Be that guy that finds out and tell me so I don't have to look into it.
I think maybe Mark Sargent might have a subject matter expert on that area, and also Scott, look at all of Mark Sargent's subject matter expert interviews, because they are kind of the thing that really got me over to the flat Earth side, because there is so many people in so many professions that have they're experts in their field, and they can show you categorically how all those things work on a flat stationary enclosed plane.
Yeah, and what you find when you dive into a lot of those specific stories and understand where they're coming from, you're finding out that there was some sort of deception that was part of it, and it works perfectly on a flat, motionless, enclosed Earth, but they had to really make things complex and account for things that didn't exist and make you think you're accounting for things that didn't exist, like when it comes to, lasers and radio waves and, shooting missiles, the military guys and the pilots and things like that, and you really start to see through all of that deception. So, Scott, hopefully that helps, and thanks again for chiming in. We appreciate it. Okay, let's get to the last call for this week, guys. Here it is.
Hey, Paul and Mitch, Scott from Wisconsin. I wanted to answer your question this week. I think the globe's best proof is celestial objects and their movement. All of their movement fits what you expect to see if you're on a spinning globe and not a flat stationary Earth. The only rebuttal I ever hear is the analogy that you can't tell anything about the floor by looking at the ceiling. That analogy isn't really very good, because we can predict what we see about, because we can predict what we should see if all of the celestial objects are moving around us, but that's not what we see. So let me know what you guys think. Thanks.
All right. Thanks again for the call. I guess I would start by saying, and I'd like to hear Nathan and Mitchell's thoughts on this, obviously, but I would start by saying the reason that we are able to predict those things is because we've been observing them in these cycles for thousands of years. When it comes to eclipses, when it comes to the quote unquote planets moving, those other lights in the sky that don't make concentric circles around the North Star. These things have been observed for many, many generations, and they continue to repeat the same cycle over and over again. And I believe that it was just a mathematical construct that they came up with then and backed into a globe model, and saying that is causational when it's nothing more than correlation in my mind. Mitch, you first, and then Nathan, I'd like to hear you wrap up on that.
Yeah, I love it when people say and assert that celestial body movement is the best proof for a globe Earth, because I like to use those best proof for globe Earths against them, because instead of going through the logical fallacies, you can actually do your own observations of reality. So these things in the sky, they appear to move across the sky in their model, not because they themselves are moving. It's because the globe underneath their feet are moving. So if that is true, that you are standing on the globe looking up at the sun, looking up at the stars and sun are moving because the globe is moving, then when you leave the globe, say in a drone, to observe the sun set, there's so many sunsets from a drone, the sun should actually not move. You have left the surface of the globe, the rotating reference frame, you've entered the inertial reference frame. So when you observe anything in the inertial reference frame that is already in the inertial reference frame, which is the stars, the sun, they would not move. The Earth underneath you would move, because that is what is being claimed to move. But when we do leave the Earth and view the stars, view the sun, view the moon, they keep moving. So that's how I turn their strong arguments against them, by observations from reality.
Excellent. Thank you, Mitch. Nathan, thoughts?
Well, as this is the last question, so I might as well give a conclusory statement, which is to say that the assumption that we're on a sphere is so well ingrained into people that they'll, when they're ingrained with it, casually rattle off 3 fallacies like that guy did. And he did a much better job of the other guy, which I had to paraphrase what he was claiming. In this instance, he's given us the begging the question fallacy, Earth is a sphere. He's also given us a false dichotomy. Well, I don't see how it could work any other way than on a sphere, my begging the question fallacy. And he did actually formulate it almost into the affirming the consequent. So he's got, if Earth is a sphere, then we will observe star rotation. Again, it's in the north and south hemisphere. He's declaring on a sphere, begging the question, right? Assuming that which he's trying to prove. So if I assume that when I travel to Australia, I'm antipodal to where I began in the UK, if I assume that I'm antipodal when I make that journey and then observe star rotations, then I prove that I've travelled antipodal like I assumed I did when I made the journey to make these observations of the star rotations. Therefore, my assumption that I travelled antipodal is correct. So if P, Earth a sphere, as he declared, then Q, star rotation, I observe star rotation because I've assumed I've travelled antipodal with my begging the question fallacy when I made my journey. Therefore, P, Earth's obviously therefore a sphere, like I assumed would be my premise. So triple your trouble fallacy. He also presented it as what could be the alternative. Therefore, he's dropped in subtly a false dichotomy, which was identified earlier by Mitchell, presenting A or B in false dichotomy. Is it a reified flat Earth pancake that you guys don't reify because models are pseudoscience, versus my globe Earth model with an assumption of antipodal travel when I observe star rotation? So which is it? Oh, well, you can't describe it with a flat Earth map that you've been given by the government. Therefore, my model's the right one. No, mate. That's a false dichotomy, begging the question fallacy, all wrapped up in an affirming the consequent formal logical fallacy. If P, then Q, Q, therefore P. Like most of the arguments when seeming complex, and like there can be no explanation. No, you've just assumed you travelled antipodal when you went to Australia. You didn't. That was just your assumption.
Period.
Brilliant.
Paragraph. Period. Paragraph. That's it. Way to wrap up, Nathan. That was very, very well said. And hopefully the caller there learned something and can digest that, because when the next globe defender comes at him with, hey, look, see Jupiter up there, and it moves the way it moves through the sky, that proves we live on a sphere. he's going to be able to tear that up. So very, very well done. All right. That was it for this week. Thank you, everybody that called in and left a message. We appreciate that. Hopefully you liked our responses. And let's see who's going to win a T-shirt this week. So drum roll, please. I'll put the names here. Congratulations. Jewel. All right. Jewel, if that's your name, that's the way it was spelled on the speak pipe. So congratulations. You're this week's winner of a free Dome Life Podcast T-shirt. So I'll be in touch with you very soon. And if you get to me before I get to you, please send me your shirt size and an address of where we can ship one out to you. Don't forget to listen each week. Chime in with your answer to the question of the week. Mitchell, hope you're ready because I'm putting you on the spot here momentarily. Question of the week to be entered into a drawing for a free T-shirt. Congratulations again to Jewel. All right. The question for the next show is...
I don't like to corner our listeners into a question, so I reckon we should just open it up. If you've got a question about anything, give it to us and you could win a shirt. Simple as that.
The question is, what's your best question for us?
What's your best question?
And if we can't handle it, we're going to send it over to Nathan so he can. All right. And if you'd like to snag a Dome Life T-shirt without having to wait or pose a question to us, you can order one today at paulontheplane.com/gear. We've got men's and women's sizes, versions available, a whole host of sizes and colors. And if you are listening and you have purchased one, please snap a picture of yourself or have someone else do it. Shoot it over to me so I can add it to the website. You can see all of the photos at paulontheplane.com, if I can get the word out, paulontheplane.com/photo wall. And with that, I guess we will wrap up for another week. Mitchell or Nathan, both of you, I'd love to hear the last word. What's on your mind?
Who do you want first?
All right, I'll just plug Nathan's channel again. Thank you so much, Nathan, for coming on our show. You can catch Nathan daily debates, 2 p.m. UK time, 8 a.m. Central Time, 11 p.m. Australian time on Nathan Oakley, 1980. Thank you, Nathan, for coming on, mate.
Yeah, if I can, I'll give the top 3 globe destroyers. Number 1, the Black Swan. You cannot see a physical geometric sphere edge for a horizon. Number 2, you can't have gas pressure without a container. If the sky was a vacuum, the gas we breathe would fill the space. And number 3, Earth is not rotating. If Earth was rotating, we'd observe 15 degrees an hour deviation as Earth rotated underneath stuff. Thank you very much for having me on Dome Life. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've been great hosts.
Thank you so much, Nathan. And for those of you listening, take those 3 things down, learn them, be able to explain them, be able to walk somebody through those, and you're going to be very, very successful in your conversations and getting them to begin to doubt that we live on a spinning, orbiting, wobbling, salty water space pair-covered rocket traveling at 4 different speeds in 4 different directions. Yes, I can't believe that I used to believe that either. If you have feedback on the show, you have a story to share, got a question for us, or just want to say hello, please leave us a speak pipe. You can go to domelifepodcast.com, look for the link at the bottom of the page where you can leave us a message, or you can simply dial 702-706-FLAT. That's 702-706-FLAT or 3528. You can also leave us a message there. We would love to hear from you. And if you're just now discovering the podcast, you can listen to all of our past episodes of Dome Life with Paul and Mitch over at domelifepodcast.com. We're also on most major podcast platforms, including SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, Google Play, and Spotify. Thank you again so much for tuning in, everybody. Much love across the plane. We appreciate you being a listener of Dome Life with Paul and Mitch every week, where we expose the globe lie, or at least each and every month, I guess, whenever we get around to recording. So until we get to speak again, open your heart, open your mind, crack open your Bible, question everything, and of course, stay flat. Bye for now. And we are clear. Nathan, thank you so much for hanging around even longer than I thought you'd be able to. We really, really appreciate your thoughts on this. It was a lot of fun.
No, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
You bet. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Thanks for staying up late.
My pleasure, Mitchell. Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, we'll let you go. Thanks again, guys, and I will send you the link when I get it all built out. But it was awesome, and I really, really had a good time. And have a good evening. And Mitch, have a good day. I know you're just getting to work.
Yep, just about to start the day. Have a good one, boys.
Take it easy, guys.
Thank you.
And I suppose I should also say a massive thank you to all of you in either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley Premiering streams for hopefully smashing the super chat, liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing, and all that good stuff. Be sure to check out Mitchell from Australia and Paul on the Plane podcasts to keep up to date with their flat Earth debate. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!